Your business is worth exactly what the market says it's worth. Not what you think it's worth, not what your friend says, not what the formula says, and not what your accountant calculated last year. It's worth what a qualified buyer will pay for it. And that's the number that matters. But before we go there, we need to understand how professionals approach valuation. Because if you don't understand the framework buyers and their advisors are working from, you'll walk into one of the most important negotiations of your life without knowing the rules of the game. Hi, I'm Ryan Guth. I sold my business more than a decade ago. I went into wealth management to help founder owners like myself navigate the largest transaction of their lives. So you could call me a financial advisor or wealth manager, but with a specific focus area. I'm also a certified financial planner professional, or CFP for short, and in 2024, I published a book called Permission to Exit, Prepare to Sell Your Business Without Regret. So let me walk you through the three approaches professionals use, and then I'll show you what drives the number that determines your outcome. But before I do that, let me share something I've noticed after speaking with hundreds of business owners over the years. By the time most owners seriously start thinking about selling, they're often past the most advantageous window. Not because the business is failing, but because the conditions that make a business most valuable to a buyer don't last forever. Think about it like jumping off a swing at the playground. If you jump on the way up, you land clean and move forward. If you jump on the way down, it doesn't go as well. So when I was a kid, that meant a face full of wood chips. So selling a business works the same way. Buyers aren't valuing your business based on what it's done in the past. They're valuing it based on what they believe it can do going forward. They're buying the future story of your business. So, if growth is slowing, margins are tightening, or you're starting to mentally step back, that changes the story that a buyer is willing to underwrite. And it changes your leverage in the process. When a business is still growing, the conversation is very different. You have options and can be selective. You get to negotiate from a position where you don't need the transaction, and that tends to lead to better outcomes, valuation, deal terms, partner selection, and ultimately freedom in your next chapter. So keep that in mind as we go through this, because understanding how your business is valued is only useful if you're thinking about timing at the same time. And if you want to hear more about when to sell your business, go back and check out my most recent video. So let's get into the three approaches professionals use to value a business. Approach number one, the asset approach. This approach values a business based on what it owns, its tangible assets adjusted for current market value minus liabilities. So think of it as liquidation value. What would you get if you sold everything the business owns today? This method is most used for businesses with substantial physical assets, like significant inventory, equipment, and real estate. For my clients, this isn't the primary valuation method, but it's worth understanding because it sets a floor. It's a baseline below which a deal just would not make sense. Approach number two is the income approach. This is the most used category for established profitable businesses. The core idea is straightforward. Use prior earnings to estimate what the business is worth based on its income potential. There are four specific methods within this category, but I want to focus on the one that is most relevant to the kinds of businesses that I work with. It's called the multiple of discretionary earnings method. You may also hear multiple of EBITDA or profit multiple. And it's particularly applicable to service-oriented businesses like contractors, accounting, healthcare, engineering, dental, and similar industries where the owner's relationships and reputation play a meaningful role in the value of the business. The calculation itself is simple to express. So here's how it goes. It's profit multiplied by a multiplier, often called a multiple. Sorry, that was a lot. Profit multiplied by a multiple plus the tangible assets that the business owns. P times M plus stuff, if you want to put it bluntly. Sometimes stuff is left out of the equation already because it's actually just part of the P. It's the means to get to the profit. So you may not always see stuff in the equation. But here's where it gets interesting and where owners could focus on the wrong variable. A lot of people fixate on the profit number, and that's totally understandable. But the multiple is where the real leverage is. That multiple is determined by marketability. How attractive is this business to a sophisticated buyer? How predictable and transferable is the revenue? And how dependent on the owner is the business? How predictable is the growth story? How much risk is a buyer absorbing when they write the check? Two businesses with identical profit numbers can carry very different multiples and therefore very different valuations based entirely on those qualitative factors. That's why knowing where you stand now is so valuable. We'll talk about how you can find your current business value and multiple for free later in the video. You can work on becoming more profitable, but wouldn't it make more sense to learn what drives your multiple and then work on that before you're ready to sell? So think about this example. Todd had a business that does $3 million in annual profit. Based on the value drivers in his industry, things like client concentration, recurring revenue, owner independence, his multiple right now is 4. He's got $1 million in equipment and cash in the bank. So let's just say the business is worth $13 million. That's $3 million in profit times a 4 multiple plus $1 million in assets. No debt. So $13 million. So we go see a few deal people, M&A advisors, investment bankers, and they all agree that if the owner could make 2 great hires to get himself out of the day-to-day operations, we could fetch a 5 or even 6x multiple. So let's say the owner hires those 2 new employees to allow him to step back a bit. So we're now talking a $16 to $19 million exit because the multiple increased due to one small change based on information that the deal coordinators that we spoke about earlier that I work with usually give away for free. So for reference, another method worth knowing in this category is discounted cash flow. This approach projects how much money the business will generate in future years and then discounts those future dollars back to what they're worth today. Because a dollar you receive now is worth more than a dollar you must wait years for. This method requires more assumptions, but it's commonly used for businesses with strong, predictable growth trajectories. Now let's talk about approach 3, the market approach. This approach values your business based on what comparable businesses have recently sold for. If a similar business in your industry and size sold at a certain multiple of earnings, that data point informs what your business might command. The challenge is that this data is significantly harder to find for privately held small to mid-sized businesses than it is for larger companies. The market for private business sales isn't transparent the way public stock markets are. But experienced M&A advisors and investment bankers who work in specific industries will accumulate this data over time, and that is one of the most valuable things a good advisor brings to the table. So what does this mean for you? Well, here's the summary worth holding on to. 3 approaches: asset, income, and market. Each has its place, and in many actual transactions, elements of more than one approach are considered. But at the end of the day, none of these formulas determine what your business is actually worth. The market does. A motivated, qualified buyer who understands your industry and believes in your growth story. That's where your real valuation comes from. Which brings me back to where we started. Your business is worth what the market says it's worth, and the market's assessment of your business is highest when momentum is visible, growth is real, and the story the buyer needs to tell themselves and their partners is easy to believe. That window doesn't stay open forever. If you're doing $1 million or more in annual profit and selling is something you're seriously considering, even in the next few years, the most valuable thing you can do right now isn't to wait. It's to understand what your business would command today, what's driving your multiple, and what you could do to move that number, that multiple, before you go to market. It's important to know where you stand today. So I've developed relationships with lots of deal people, and we can call them investment bankers or M&A advisors. These are people who will eventually help to create a competitive process for the sale of your business. It is my privilege to facilitate those introductions and quarterback the process. We'll meet with several professionals who make informal business valuation a complementary part of their prospective client process. That way, you'll have several opinions of market value and a list of value drivers that impact your multiple and how well you stack up against the competition. You only get one shot, and there's no second attempt at the same transaction. No rewind button. And once you've gone to market, and no recovering the months or years that you spend building leverage. The owners who walk away with the best outcomes aren't always the ones with the best businesses. They're the ones who know the game before they started playing. If you're ready to get a clearer picture of where you stand, click the link in the description below and just schedule a call. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.